Bradford.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Friends, also known as Ricky France, and a great long conversation for you today. These shows keep getting longer and longer, but I enjoy them. I enjoy having them as long as I'm available, which in the past has been really hard, but of late it seems like I've been able to schedule these shows when I have a little bit more free time, and I can go a little longer, and the guests are also available to go a little longer, and it really creates just a awesome podcast, because I think these long form conversations, which people like Joe Rogan has really perfected, it really makes it interesting, because sometimes some of your favorite parts or most interesting story or the quote or perspective that sticks with you in the conversation, sometimes it's later in a 2-hour, 3-hour conversation. So I'm glad I've had the privilege to kind of make some of these longer podcasts of late. But today, documentary filmmaker Francis Richard Conolly is my guest. He's a historian and filmmaker. He has a documentary which is hard to find even if you know the exact title and you type in the exact title, which is JFK to 9/11, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. Look for it. You could still find it uploaded in places, but a common theme we keep talking about, big tech censorship, has made it really hard to find any of these crucial, important documentaries. I'll try to keep this short because it is a long conversation. It's another almost 3-hour conversation. If you want to support the show, I do have a Patreon page. If you do support the show, then I'll let you know in advance who I'm booking, who's going to be on the show, all that type of stuff. And even if it's just $1, it goes a long way. I am attempting to do this value for value thing, so if you get some value out of the show, try to give some value back. It doesn't have to be via Patreon, or I also have a PayPal account if you want to tip the show. But it doesn't have to be financially. If you want to support the show financially, and you can, I really, really appreciate the people who have. But rate the show, review the show, tell people about the show, and hopefully somebody who is in a better financial place can support the show financially. So that also helps, just doing those type of things. And I think that's it. I'll also got a merch store if you want to support the show, the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. The rippleeffectpodcast.com is my website. You'll find links to all that stuff. Also my YouTube channel. In the show description, I have links to all my social media accounts. If you want to connect with me on Facebook, I have a personal Facebook page. Just let me know you're not a bot, and we'll connect. That's about it, I think. If I forgot anything, I'll let you know on the next intro. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace. What I'll do, I'll cut that out, and I'll start right from here once we start talking about Trump, because I think our perspectives on it are interesting. And I think it's a debate that a lot of people are having openly and should have, because I think it's something that a lot of people are confused about, this idea that is he slightly different? Because the thing is, like, you're right. I think in regards to, you can make the case, and I think, it wouldn't be too hard to make the case of the things we said, that he's a womanizer, that he probably, isn't the most moral of people, especially in regards to women and being faithful and whatnot. But, it's almost like somebody could be really good at one thing and then suck at another thing, or a flaw in one thing doesn't necessarily mean he has those same flaws somewhere else. I mean, it just, in some cases, I'd like to think that it'd be easier to believe that he is as dumb as people say he is, and he's not intelligent whatsoever. And in some cases, he makes that argument for people because he says some dumb things. But I also think there's some examples of him being clever. There's some examples of him, you look at like the whole hydroxychloroquine thing, right? So Big Pharma very much wanted to tell the public that there was nothing that could treat COVID-19. They needed to get all this money, the Operation Warp Speed, all this money that was going to Big Pharma to help come up with something because everybody's dying and we're in such a panic and whatnot. And that's why they demonize zinc and vitamin C and vitamin D and hydroxychloroquine, because hydroxychloroquine is a generic cheap drug. And they wanted to get all this money, and they wanted to patent something expensive and get all this money to develop it and make money twice, really, because you'd be getting the money from the public to fund your research and development, which usually would have to come out of Big Pharma's pocket. And then we would pay for the drug. So we would pay to make the drug, then we'd have to pay to purchase the drug. So it's a win-win for Big Pharma, which is exactly what's going to eventually end up happening, because they're already talking about giving out the vaccine for free. It's free for us, but it's not free for us because taxpayers' money is what's going to pay for this. So it's when he openly talks about hydroxychloroquine, and it seemed like it was a fu to Big Pharma in regards to him saying like, hey, you know what? Like I'm going to even say I'm taking it, just to make the point that when I say this is an alternative and I'm hearing some successful, some people were having success with it, then I'm going to openly say it regardless if you guys don't like me saying it. So when you see things like that, it does make me think like, holy shit, like what other president would have fought against Big Pharma like that? Another thing too is like, as you know, like politics is it's pro wrestling. It's illusion. It's theater, right? And the thing is that a lot of times in the past, people would play along with the theater. So it's like, even though you knew a newspaper or a reporter or journalist had a political agenda and they would question you a certain way because they want to make you look bad, or they would put you on the spot to make you look bad, everybody would just play along. So if you're a politician, you're like, okay, I'm a liberal and this is a Fox News journalist. He's going to try to get me to make a mistake or say something that's going to make me look stupid, but I'll play along. But and everybody would play along with this, and vice versa. So if you're a Republican politician and somebody from MSNBC is questioning you, then they would try to do the same thing, try to expose you, make you look bad, not for moral reasons, just because they have a team that they want to defend and they want to make the other team look bad. But never did somebody like pull back the curtain the way Trump said or has, and just say, hey, you know what? This is all theater. I'm not playing along. You're fake.
Let me take that one on, because
okay, yeah,
the whole thing about theater, because there was something I particularly wanted to do on this show with you tonight, because a lot of people have been asking me in the street, and a lot of people have been writing comments and places, wondering what I make of this whole deep state thing and the QAnon thing. So I'd like to say this to Americans, if I may. There is no deep state. There never has been. And the whole thing with QAnon is a classic example of a rich man's trick. So people are bound to say, well, how does he know that? The reason that the whole thing with the deep state came about goes like this. Once my movie had gone viral and it was seriously big, and there was that phase when it was being used to advertise everything, I noticed that people were falling over themselves. The advertisers were falling over themselves to get on one of the sites that was showing my film, because they knew that it was getting, I was told over 1 billion hits. So it was reaching so many people. What they will have done, and by they I mean the CIA, they'll have sat down and said, look, we've got to use the real world. That is what these people do. They use the real world for their own ends in whatever way they can. And they'll have said to themselves, look, Conolly's made this film and everybody's watching it. Is there some way we can use it for our own ends? And what they'll have said is, okay, what do the people want to hear? And they'll have thought to themselves, well, we can't get out of this thing that there's obviously been collusion between CIA and the mafia and organized crime, and running the country and all the rest of it. So somebody's had the bright idea of making up this notion that there's a corrupt element, yes, to American law enforcement and justice and all the rest of it. Someone has had that idea. And the reason I think that they've done it is because in my movie there's that moment where Charles Lloyd Harrelson, and I was so, oh my God, delighted when I found that clip. I'm sure you remember the moment where he's saying, "Do you honestly think that Oswald could have killed Kennedy alone without some help from an agency of the US government?" And then he says, "or at least a portion of that agency." And I think they've gone from there and they've said to themselves, okay, we'll admit, if you like, that there's this dirty underbelly in American life. We'll call it the deep state, and we'll say that they are fighting against Donald Trump and that he's trying to drain the swamp and clean everything up by getting rid of the deep state. It is all just propaganda. There never was a tiny bit of truth to that. And QAnon have been tasked with selling the idea, and other websites as well. They're not alone. There's other journalists who've been tasked with selling that idea to the public. But the whole notion of the deep state itself, that's been the core of the propaganda that's, as it were, supported Donald Trump all the way through. And I'm just wondering what they're going to try to, lay on the bread, as it were, for Joe Biden. What kind of junk are you going to have to put up with, from him? But as I say, from the outside, I don't think there's a single reason. I have seen no reason to think anything other than Donald Trump is simply a puppet whose lies are being written for him. And those lies, as ever, as I've said in the movie, are always constructed by taking elements of truth. Yes, they make the lies sound more plausible, but that's how it works. They take elements of truth, mix it with lies, and confuse everybody in that way. And, they just go on and on and on and on doing it, regardless of the reaction. So that's the perspective, that I think is the correct one.
Well, in some senses, I agree with you. I think the QAnon thing has been completely blown out of proportion. I think it's one of those things where, some people say everything happens for a reason. I say people find reasons for why things happen. And, I use the example, it's like if I've said this to my wife before, and she probably didn't like me using her as an example, but I'm like, if we broke up and I found somebody who's amazing and I end up remarrying or whatever, I'd be like, oh, see, that breakup was meant to happen because I found this new person. And if we stay together and we never break up and we get through it, I'll be like, hey, look, it worked out. We got through it. So it's like we do. And I think the QAnon thing's the same thing where it's very similar, where people can connect dots that like they want to believe it's true. So because of it, and I'm not saying I know for sure or not. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm always open to being wrong. But it looks like they're being tricked, and a lot of times they're just connecting dots that are pretty far from each other, and they're looking for like, oh, well, maybe they meant this or this, or maybe they meant that, or it's 3D chess, it's 4D chess, it's 5D chess, whatever they want to call it. And it's like, maybe, or you're being tricked the whole time, and you truly are because a lot of people who are in the QAnon, and this is just from my personal experiences, are people who aren't like yourself or myself who have studied history and been in this whole alternative media and alternative view to history world for very long. It's a lot of people that are like, oh, QAnon woke me up. And it's like, wait, if that's what woke you up, there's a lot of shit you got to learn. There's a lot of stuff, prior to this that you have to learn. Like I always say, you have a better understanding of today when you take when you take the path backwards and see where the path started, and you follow the path backwards. You're like, okay, that's how we got here. We got here because this happened and that happened. And then, it's like I use World War II as an example. Some people are World War II buffs, but without understanding World War I, there's going to be stuff you're missing about World War II in regards to the fall of the Ottoman Empire and just how the Middle East was carved up with the Sykes-Picot Agreement and all this stuff, like, so all and then Hitler, a lot of people believe that if World War I never happened and Germany wasn't basically poor and just the economy completely just demolished the way it was, the treaties and all this stuff, that maybe World War II wouldn't have happened. So it's like there is the sense of like, okay, you can kind of understand what's going on today if you only study today, but if you understand the past, you have a much better perspective and understanding.
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking of which, about what today, I think a lot of people would want us to talk a bit more about Ghislaine Maxwell and Mr. Epstein and all the rest of it. After the Truthzilla interview, is there anything specific you'd like me to take on from there? Because there is. And when I was on Truthzilla, we did have a few technical problems. I don't know if they were obvious to people, but I didn't feel like I completed the answer very well about Robert Maxwell, and I don't think I got onto the whole thing about the deposition. And I don't. There was something I wanted to bring up about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
Because I was wondering if there was any YouTube videos where you can actually hear Epstein speaking. So I just put that in, and lo and behold, there's a few videos that are a few minutes long with Epstein giving a deposition himself. And I actually think that this is another classic example of what I mean about journalists today not working hard and not being all that bright. Because first of all, it was very interesting to me that Epstein himself, I mean, I don't know what kind of a character you imagined he would be, but I expected a ram. I expected an aggressive man who would be the type who, like a no-nonsense man. And he didn't have that, to me, he didn't have that kind of character at all. When he was in court, he was very yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, 3 bags full, ma'am. He was terribly polite, almost to the point of being effete, I thought. But it was very noticeable, I thought. During one particular question, and I don't know if you've seen the clip that I mean, where the whole question of Virginia Roberts is raised. And as soon as the name is mentioned, you see his face go, and he's kind of like this. So he knows what's being talked about, but as soon as the man has finished asking his question, he starts with this thing where he's going, "Oh, Virginia? How are you spelling that?" And this man is, "Come on, it's like, like the state of Virginia. You know how to spell Virginia." So he says, "Oh, right. What about Roberts? How are you spelling Robert?" So,
well, he was almost making I remember watching those videos, and he was almost making a mockery of the whole thing.
Well, the thing is, that's my point, because other people, like I say, have been looking at the Ghislaine Maxwell deposition. And I came across this girl on another video who she did it in a very articulate way. I was proud of her, this English journalist here. And she said that what you've got here is an example of people who've got limitless money. And they are taught, they are coached in how to prevaricate endlessly. That's what this is. When Ghislaine Maxwell is doing her thing, and people have already pointed this out, she's saying, well, okay, there's a laundry basket full of sex toys. What's a sex toy? I don't know what a sex toy is. Like anybody would ever, come on, every 14-year-old knows what a sex toy is. And she's going around. Well, she's asking what a puppet is. And in case anybody out there has not had the time to find out what that little side issue was all about, apparently Prince Andrew had a spitting image puppet, a sort of a life-size spitting image puppet of himself at Epstein's Island, and apparently he used it to grope Virginia Roberts' breasts, and just for a bit of levity, and this got into the deposition. So first of all, I want people to understand that it's going to be very important if it ever goes to court, and I've made it plain on Truthzilla, I do not believe she's in custody. I think that this is just how they're controlling the narrative. But if there ever is a court case, it will be very interesting to me to see whether the judge allows that kind of prevarication, because it is so obvious that that is all they are doing, that they are just trying to spin out the proceedings forever in the hope of there never being a conclusion. But just to wrap that up, because I think that there was just one other thing I thought was important. There's a moment in her deposition where the lawyer, where Sigrid Macaulay, very pointedly asks her, "Have you ever had sex with another female?" And she says, on the advice of counsel, "I'm going to refuse to answer that question. Flat out, I refuse to answer." Now, in today's world, would anybody have been all that particularly worried if she had just said, "Oh, I'm bisexual"? So, I don't think anybody would have put much on that. But to say flat out, "I refuse to answer the question," that's going to make people think immediately, well, there's got to be something there that's really important. And there obviously is, because I would say that from the testimony of Virginia Roberts, that, and to use modern parlance, that Maxwell is a butch dyke, and that she's one of these older women who likes to, fornicate with a much younger girl in order to play the male role. And if that's the case, it does seem to me that Virginia Roberts is making all this up. Otherwise, there wouldn't be all these other witnesses. If they are going to drag it to court, woman after woman after woman after woman, who is going to say, "Well, that woman sexually abused me over and over and over again," well, she's not got a chance. So if that's the case, then they are not going to allow a trial like that. The powers that be are not going to let that go that way, because I'm sure that they know that if they do, that she's going to go down. And if it looks like she's going to go down, well, she's going to take everybody else down with her, you would think. When Jimmy Savile was being interviewed by Louis Theroux, and he was in the back of a Rolls Royce with Louis Theroux, one of the things he said, and this was long before anybody found out about Prince Andrew, one of the things he said was, "Okay, you can call me a pedophile. People can think I'm a pedophile. I don't care what people think. You might think I'm a pedophile. Somebody else will say not." But he said, "If I go down, I'm taking everybody else down with me." Well, who's the everybody else, Ricky? Come on, this man is a friend. He's like Prince Charles' closest friend, the heir to the throne, close friend of Prince Philip. He's knighted. He's a friend of the Pope. Well, it's what more can you infer from that? I would say that you can infer one hell of a lot from that.
That story, because of Ghislaine and her father's linked to the UK, was that story, because it was pretty big here because Epstein lived in America and it was linked to so many American politicians.
Yeah.
Was this whole story equally as big in England because of their links to the UK and royal family? I know the Prince Andrew thing.
Oh, it's equally as big again, Ricky. I don't think I did all that well with the Truthzillas. I almost feel like apologizing to them. I think I was a bit heavy with the Robert Maxwell thing. But now that people know, I think in your country and in mine, because the whole thing is just as big in the UK. And to be honest, Ricky, I think it's huge all around the world. It is being talked about in Australia, Canada, in the Arab world. It's a huge story all the way around the world. The point I wanted to make was that you have here a man in Robert Maxwell whose backstory, for me, the whole thing about him being a Ukrainian peasant, rubbish. I do not believe a word of that, not a single word. Where he came from, I've no idea. Who created him? Who knows? But you have here a man who's got And you can look this up if anybody's wondering, again, oh, where does Conolly get his information from? You can look this up on Wikipedia. You can look this up on his Wikipedia page, that he's had close intelligence links to the KGB, to Mossad, to the CIA, and MI5. He is exactly like a man like Alan Dulles, who was linked with German intelligence, the Nazi intelligence, and Russian intelligence, as well as American intelligence during the war. To me, if that doesn't underline with the thickest black pencil that everything in the world is a rich man's trick, I don't know what would. And now you've got this man's daughter right at the epicenter, right in the eye of the hurricane, of a child sex trafficking network, which is obviously there to service the VIPs from all over the world. So it makes you wonder, or at least it makes me wonder, how long this has been going on. And the thing that I would love to know most, and this is one of these things, you see, Ricky, which will, in human history, this will never even be asked, it'll never be in a history book, we'll probably never know. But everything starts in a man's mind, sometime, somewhere. Everything, the cameras that are looking at us right now, begin in a man's mind. This technology, this laptop technology, that light that's illuminating me, illuminating you, everything begins in a man's mind somewhere, sometime. Someone in the 50s, 60s, it may have even been before that, has had the idea, oh yeah, got it. Yes, this is how we'll control all the big capital in the world. We'll go to children's homes. We'll find orphans who nobody knows anything about, and nobody even knows they're there. They don't have any relatives, so there's nobody looking out for them. And we'll use them as child sex slaves, passing them all around the world, offering them to millionaires and billionaires, and then we've got something on them, and we've got them all under control. Someone had that idea, and will we ever know who it was? That is, to me, at this moment in time, that's the most important question for mankind, is who started this whole thing. But there's no doubt to me that Ghislaine Maxwell and her father were the core of it from the beginning to now.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to know if it's some weird rich man's fetish, because is it that, or is it more of a blackmail thing? Because
well, it's a blackmail. It's about power, Rick. It's about blackmail, and all that's happened with Ghislaine Maxwell, and this is why when I was on with the Truthzillas, I was musing as to whether you would have a situation like that situation that I showed it in my movie, where as soon as anything gets too hot in terms of a subject, you have the man saying, "Oh, Mr. Speaker, really, we need to get into executive session here, if you don't mind." You go behind closed doors. You see, if they are going to have a trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, I think they're going to be interrupting it every other second, and bringing up the issue of national security, which only means the issue of political embarrassment for the ones at the very top, because that is what it's all about. They have put this VIP pedophile network in place to control politicians from all around the world. And I'm sure that in me saying that people will, a certain type of people will immediately be saying, "Oh yes, it's a Jewish plot. It's a Jewish plot. It's always a Jewish plot." It's not always a Jewish plot. How could they do that all by themselves? I mean, come on. Israel's a tiny country, and half the time these people don't know what they're talking about because they think it's a Jewish nation. Most of the people who say these kind of stupid things don't know that Israel is half secular. Half of the people in Israel are not religious at all. There's very few people who know that. So it's one thing to talk about Israel. If you want to talk about Zionism, okay, we can go off in another direction. But there's very few people who know what they're talking about when they bring up Zionism. But yes, it is primarily about power. It is primarily about blackmailing those in power so that nobody with a huge amount of capital can ever hurt the people at the top. That's what it's mainly all about.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, one thing that you said before, the shadow government, the deep state. I mean, don't you think that because there is a military industrial complex, because there is these other blackmail schemes going behind the scenes, and the CIA has an agenda and all these other agendas, that's kind of like a shadow government or a deep state, that could be because again, a lot of times when people talk about conspiracies, they like to lump everything in like there's one person on top and everybody and he's the one pulling the strings for everybody, you know. But I don't think it's that simple sometimes. I think in many cases, if not in all cases, it's more complex where
No,
sometimes
you've brought up something so important there, and thank you very much, because this was something that. Thank you very much for that. It's a very important point, and you see, I've had a great deal of people asking me to explain everything, and I can't always explain everything because, as you've just pointed out, life doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always make sense. And I'll give the classic example to me is the movie that's called Wag the Dog. I cannot get over it. I mean, if anybody ever wanted to really throw my ideas and my message, one thing or another, back in my face, the best thing they could do would be to say, well, if Hollywood is so corrupt, why did they make Wag the Dog? That's a really good question, because they gave away so many of the CIA's secrets and gave away so much of what they do. When the pandemic started, one of the first things I noticed, and I don't know if you did too, was that you may not have had it in America, I don't know, but as soon as the pandemic really caught hold and people were having to queue for bread and wear the stupid masks and one thing or another, I noticed straight away that there were all these adverts. That, you know how you've got your email box and there's always the adverts at the top and the adverts at the side. The adverts at the side especially. And all of a sudden we're seeing all these things and it's like, oh, please could you support this in the third world because there's flooding in Vietnam, and there's an orphan here in India who needs your help, and another one in Pakistan. And one of the things that they put on was a picture of a little boy who was supposed to be in Syria. And this little boy, he's got this expression on his face, and he's kind of going like this. He's got his arms folded. And it's exactly the same as that moment in Wag the Dog, where the girl with the headscarf is wandering through the rubble of the bombed out town. You know what I mean? It is exactly the same thing. It could not be more similar. I couldn't get over it that it was just such obvious propaganda. So, why would they let us have Wag the Dog? And several people have surprised me over this whole pandemic thing. And I have to say, Piers Morgan surprised me prior to that. I think, Ricky, that most Americans know who Piers Morgan is, don't they? He
actually he had a show on CNN for a long time, and and I know like the Alex Jones appearance was a big deal on there and whatnot.
Well, Piers Morgan has surprised me twice. The first was he was one of the guests on a documentary called Unlawful Killing, which was trying to show to people
Princess Diana.
The whole Princess Diana conspiracy. Yeah,
great. It's a great documentary, and it's actually I think.
Well, I don't think it's a great documentary.
Really?
I think it's an adequate documentary. I don't regard the people who made that film as particularly skillful, but at least they were trying to tell the truth.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Credit where credit's due. I don't think it's a particularly skilled movie. I don't think it's all that well written, but I was so surprised to see Piers Morgan on there saying that when he heard that this claim that the CIA, that MI5 rather, had never killed anybody, and he said, well, what the hell's the point in them then? That's a load of bull. He said he laughed out loud when he was told that. Well, That surprised me. I mean, he's been so much a part of the establishment propaganda machine for so long. I have to say that I was surprised by that. I was. That doesn't make sense to me. And I was surprised again once the Prince Andrew thing had really took hold. There were quite a few interviews by television presenters of each other, where you had an ITV presenter interviewing, especially on the breakfast shows, a BBC presenter who would talk to Prince Andrew, and they were all saying the same thing: he's a liar, he's a crook, he's an obvious child molester, and it got really heavy. And I was surprised to hear Piers Morgan say, well, this story, it's just going to run and run and run, because that's the last thing that the establishment want. And it has made me wonder how much autonomy journalists generally have. And it's sad that they don't use it more if they do have the autonomy that it appears they have. I wish there were more journalists who would watch my film and were capable of seeing the big picture, because that is the problem with journalists. They get involved too much in tittle tattle. It's a soap opera, although the way they go on about life, you'd think it was a soap opera, and they don't see the big picture at all. And most of them, as I say, just because they're not bright enough. But I'm really glad you raised that, because I do my best to explain what's really going on in the world. But real life, doesn't always make sense. It hardly makes sense that Donald Trump would say to the world, "Oh yeah, Epstein's Island, yeah, definitely a cesspit. And if you don't believe me, you should ask Prince Andrew about it." I mean, the people who handled Donald Trump, they must have been going, "Oh my God, what's he saying?" But you see, that was 4 years ago, and I think that 4 years ago they thought it wasn't going to matter. But look what's happened now. Thank heaven. So thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Yeah. I think sometimes things are, and it's funny because sometimes the opposite happens too, where people tell conspiracy theorists that, oh, sometimes you believe in this conspiracy theory because it's hard to believe things are as simple as they seem. And it's like, maybe, but if you do a lot of research and stuff, I mean, there's been more cases of stuff that seemed hard to believe and then finding out that there's some truth to it than the opposite, where it's like something seems hard to believe and then you find out it's complete bullshit. And it seems like, a lot of things in the past that people in alternative media, alternative researchers, alternative historians. I mean, I remember when I started this podcast getting in conversations with people who were history buffs, and even the idea that they knew about Pearl Harbor was something that they would fight back against. Like, oh, that's not really accepted in mainstream history by historians and whatnot. And now it's like accepted. Now you also get like, I remember when I had Gerard Williams on. He's another perfect example who wrote the book Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler. And I remember when I had him on years ago. I mean, I started the show probably 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and he was on probably the first year or so. And just the idea that he made it to Argentina, people wouldn't even entertain that. They're like, oh, he obviously died in Europe. He never made it to South America. And now it's kind of accepted, because History Channel came out with a show. Gerard Williams was on there. People started looking at the evidence. But it's also an example of how a lie can be told over and over again without anybody actually doing any research into it. And you find out like, wow, we just keep regurgitating this and nobody's actually looked into it. And then when somebody like Gerard Williams actually does look into it, you realize like, oh crap, we're all saying this, but there's no real evidence to prove that's even true. So, but I think you're starting to see people become much more open to the idea that a lot of what we've been told is a lie. I think people in the alternative media have been saying that they think that mainstream media and big pharma and propaganda has all overplayed their hand. And now you're seeing people open their eyes to the vaccine debate, open their eyes to maybe there are people pulling strings and there are other agendas that are influencing what's going on in the world. And people seem to be much more open to these things. I am surprised of that, but I also am surprised how many people like who would would completely poo-poo and be skeptical of any of the elite in Hollywood or politics or celebrities being involved in child trafficking. And now that that's been exposed to be, reality, they still won't believe the next thing. It's like, okay, well, that's true, but
Yeah,
this next thing.
yeah, Ricky, that is the most depressing thing of all. I totally agree. Yeah, they can only, it's almost as if their brains are like a walnut, and there's only, or like a cup, and you can only fill it with so much. That's you see, that's the difference between intellectuals and everybody else. I think it just gets too difficult for some people to think about, because they can only process a certain amount of information. The amount of information they can process is limited. That's why you often say people, people are saying this is going over my head, because it's just too much to think about, and because it's contradicting what they've heard over and over and over and over again, as you say. And this is the point that is so important to make, I think, is that really it's not so much a question of lies. It's just that if all you ever hear is the establishment version of what's going on in the world, well, that's all you ever hear. And what else do you have to base your opinions on? This is why I cannot believe that mainstream media journalists are not dying of shame, because why are you sitting there tonight talking to me? Why are so many people like the Truthzillas and one thing and another doing what they're doing? It's because the mainstream media journalists haven't done their job, and they've been showing up as people who are limited and who lack imagination, and I think just lack the iron will to find the truth, which is the very thing that journalism is supposed to be about. Journalists should be more interested than anybody in the big stories, particularly things like 9/11. They should be after the truth of that more than anyone. And I know professional journalists who've looked at that and said, well, I'm not that bothered. I'm not that interested, which is professionally disgraceful. So there's
Well,
me walking now.
well, you've seen Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald, who
Glenn Greenwald. And I think got a difficult name, Glenn Greenwald.
I didn't think it was difficult. Sometimes I say it in my head, and I'm like, "Oh, that's an easy word." And then when I try to verbalize it out loud, I'm like, "Okay, I should have practiced that before I said it on air." But he went to The Intercept and created The Intercept because of the lack of real ethical journalists out there. And now just recently he resigned from there. He left The Intercept because of the issues there. So I mean, I think if you're an actual journalist trying to expose real corruption, being in the independent world is probably the only place for you, because eventually everybody has agendas and everybody has salaries that they want to keep coming.
Well, that's it, Ricky. I mean, the main thing is that people want to keep their salaries. I mean, all the people who at the BBC who they've talked to since the Savile thing broke, they all said that, well, yeah, everybody knew what was going on, but it was just a culture at the BBC. Everybody said it was a culture of itself, that the one thing that you never did was to kind of question the lifestyles of the big stars, because it's the big stars like Jimmy Savile who people are tuning into. I mean, Jimmy Savile, actually more so on the radio, used to get huge ratings on BBC Radio. But you see, he got the huge ratings because that was the days when pop music was golden. And he was playing the Beatles, he was playing the Rolling Stones, he was playing all the greatest music that's ever been in the whole of human history. He wasn't doing anything. He was just saying, here's the Rolling Stones. Anybody could have done that. But that was why he got such huge ratings, and that was why they made him into such a huge star. And people by now, every adult by now, should be able to realize that the way things have gone with Jimmy Savile is because the establishment is Jimmy Savile. That's what everybody's got to take from this. They created this avuncular, almost saintly figure who was helping little children to, achieve their dreams, and he was helping all charity people, and he had a charity here and a charity there, and he had a bus full of all these wonderful people who were going around hospices and helping this person and helping. And the reality was a man who was having sex with the dead, who was having sex with the disabled, who was having sex with children, in some cases under 10 years of age, and that he was being the pimp for our homosexual lunatic Prime Minister, Ted Heath, by going to the Haute de la Garenne boys' home on Jersey and simply getting cartloads of boys, taking them to Ted Heath's yacht, where Ted Heath would sodomize them, kill them, and then throw them in the water. And the BBC knew all about this and kept it hidden. What, for God's sake, does that say about us as a culture, as a nation? They're wondering why I'm trying to clean up my country. Everybody has got the responsibility to clean that up, because it's these people who rule the whole of the Western world. And by the way, I should say that a huge amount of the credit for the knowledge about this, Ricky, goes to Leah McGraw-Goodman, the young American journalist who found out what was really going on Jersey. She works for Newsweek now. America should be proud of her for what she did.
Yeah, well, that's why, I know you've been on Charlie Robinson's podcast. He's a friend of mine. And I remember when he started.
Charlie, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, we've done a lot of shows together, and he was a guest on my show before he even had a podcast. He was when he was just doing his promoting his book, and great guy. But I remember when he first was proposing the idea of starting a podcast, he was kind of like, oh, like the world needs another podcast, right, Rick? And I'm just like, Charlie, that's the wrong attitude. I'm like, there's plenty of people out there putting out proper propaganda. I can't talk today. Propaganda and pushing propaganda and lying to you and deceiving you. So the thing is, the more people that are doing the opposite and trying to spread truth, I think the better.
Absolutely. Good for you. Good for you.
And I think even Truthzilla is a fairly new podcast. Same thing. Like, they've heard people like myself and other podcasters say, hey, go out there. If you want to start one, go out there and start one, because there could never be enough people fighting for
I totally
the
agree
truth.
with you, Ricky. And you've reminded me of something I wanted to say that I didn't get to say because we ran out of time. And I think this is important, particularly to Ed on the Truthzilla team. Although I'm sure Megan and Scott, I want to tell them too. They're lovely people. It's just that I was intrigued. There was a moment when Ed was talking to them. I think it was on the podcast previous to when they had me on the show. And there was a moment where Ed was kind of shaking his head. Oh, man, he's got his cap on as usual and sighing and doing what a lot of people are doing right now and saying, man, this age that we're living in, these times that we're living through, I mean, it's just so kind of unbelievable, and it's so terrible, and there's never been anything like this, and it's like the weirdest thing in the whole of human history. There's something I want to say to Ed. He's completely wrong, totally wrong, and anybody who right now is thinking to themselves, Jesus, this pandemic thing, the atmosphere that we're all fearing right at this moment, there can't have ever been anything like this in the whole of human history, surely. It's absolutely the opposite. What we are fearing and feeling right now is actually the most common feeling throughout the whole of human history. Right now, this atmosphere of people being afraid and wondering what the hell is going to come next and wondering what to do about it and thinking that these are the strangest times that have ever been. This is actually much more normal than not. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, how does he know that? And it's because all the way through history, there have been writers who've written about times like this. And the classic example is William Shakespeare. There's a moment in Richard III where he comes out with this wonderful line. And I want to make sure I get it right. He says, "The world has grown so bad that wrens make prey where eagles dare not perch." Now, that's typical, beautiful Shakespeare. And an awful lot of people will probably watch this podcast and say to themselves, "Oh, Jesus, what the hell does that mean?" But translated into modern English, he's basically saying this is a topsy-turvy time and there's never been anything like it, or that's what people think. There was another good example from a movie, I'll just tell this quickly, where I think it's Oscar Werner, where he's standing on the prow of the ship that's just about to leave the harbour with Faye Dunaway, and they're looking back at the wharf, and there's Nazi soldiers stomping around and beating people up and Jew baiting, and Faye Dunaway has got that feeling. Jesus, there can't have ever been anything like this. And Oscar Werner says, no, don't worry. It's just a temporary madness. That feeling that they had, the real people who were there at the time, who set sail on The Voyage of the Damned, which is the movie I'm referring to, because it was based on a true story, they will have had the same feeling that we're sharing now. And it's actually the most common scene in the whole of human history, because this is what the ruling class do to people in every age, if they can. We haven't had it since the Second World War, because it's been, a post-war environment. And they knew that people had gone through so much starvation and so much trauma and so much trouble, and, just they couldn't take anymore. So the chains have come off through the 1960s, 1970s, and they've been getting worse and worse and worse from the 80s onwards, sliding down to where we are now. And the big warning I want to give to people is that now that this thing has happened with Prince Andrew, because that's the only reason we've got the pandemic, it's purely and simply to cover for him and his friends. This is a contingency, as I said on the Truthzilla podcast, which they've had ready in place. Okay, anybody ever gets caught, somebody seriously at the highest level, and it's obvious that they're a paedophile, and it's obvious that there's a paedophile network. Okay, bang. We've got to put the whole of the earth into suspended animation. And that's what this has really been all about. That's what I want people to understand. And that's why really the whole thing is a hoax. Thank you for letting me say that. That's a bit long, but...
No. I'm glad. People are probably sick of hearing me talk all the time, so it's good that people get to hear you. But I agree with you. It's funny because you say that, because, and I shouldn't say I agree with you 100%, because it is something that I've had this internal dilemma about, like, okay, because I've said it on the show a bunch of times, like, we're living in the craziest of times, and many people before us have said this, but I think now it's probably truer than ever. But but this is where I actually I'm getting to, I'm leaning towards what you just stated, because recently I've thought about it more and more, and I'm like, we've, like, in my generation, or our generation, we have lived through pretty normal, problem-free lives, right? So if I was born in America, I wasn't. I was born in Portugal, but I came to America. I was raised in America. We've been in wars, but it hasn't really affected my everyday life. I always say how, like, for the longest time, getting people worked up about foreign policy or geopolitics and foreign wars is really hard to get people to get as passionate about it as I was, because they still got to go to the gym, they still got to go out to eat with their friends and loved ones, they still got to go play soccer or football, whatever they do, and enjoy life. And if we were in Syria or not in Syria, or if we were in Afghanistan, not in Afghanistan, if we were in Iraq and not in Iraq, it didn't really affect your everyday life. You still got to do these things. So we lived in pretty comfortable lives, and now is the first time that a issue, something has become so big that it's affected everything. It's affected, our sports on TV. It's affected our kids' ability to go to school. It's seeped into our personal lives.
Yes, Ricky, I know, I hear what you're saying, but
no, but no, I was actually going to say that, and this is why I agree with you. This is the first time we've lived through it, but past generations, if you lived through World War II, if you lived through World War I, if you lived through, the Black Plague, whatever it may be, you might say, hey guys, finally you get to deal with some uncertainty of the future, some anxiety, some fear of what's going on in the world the way we did, because for a long time our generation who lived in America is like, no, we're good, whatever's going on in the rest of the world doesn't affect me one bit. And now we're finally starting to see, like, okay, this must have been some of the anxiety people who lived through the Great Depression felt like.
Exactly.
This is very similar
to what the point, though, Ricky, that shouldn't be left out of it is that even though you've had a long period where the oligarchs who control America and control my country and control Europe. I mean, we've been the same in Europe as America, where you can have, like you had, troubles in Latin America, and you can have a Vietnam, and you can have Syria going on, etc., etc., etc. But throughout all of that, you haven't been a millionaire, or at least I don't think so. And the average American hasn't been a millionaire throughout that period. They have managed always, and this is the most important point of all. This is what it all comes down to. An awful lot of people, whenever they're listening to these kinds of shows and listening to intellectuals and writers and artists and one thing or another, they always want you to sort of compress it down to one thing that they can start from, one simple little beginning. What is it all boiled down to? It all boils down to the fact that throughout that whole period, they have kept us living at nothing more than a subsistence level, because they can do that. They are in a position where they can control exactly what your mortgage is, exactly what your car repayments are, exactly how much tax you pay or how much tax you don't pay. They can make sure that everybody, let's say the bottom 80% of people in Europe, in America, even though they may be professionals, they're still living at not much more than a subsistence level. And the point that I tried so hard to make when I was on the Rodrigo Soto show, and that was banned. And then I tried to say the same thing on Raconteurs News with Andy Young, and they banned that. The next morning, that was gone. And Andy Young, bless him, he was so brave. He put it back on the next day, and for some reason it then stayed up. But I tried in both those interviews to say to people, look, what you've got to try to do is imagine how things would be if the whole of Western industrial capitalism truly was, genuinely was, aimed at nothing more than making me and you and every other normal working man comfortable and wealthy. If that truly happened, there is no reason anymore, no reason why everybody in the Western world could be anything less than a millionaire. Because today we have the productivity. Digital technology has made the world so productive. Everyone could be a millionaire. They could be. So a lot of people are going to say, well, why the hell not? Why the hell not just do it? Because people will say, if I was a millionaire, it wouldn't make any difference to me if there were billionaires. And if the Queen or Trump or anybody is a trillionaire, what difference does it make if I've got millions? But the difference is that it would be the end of the ruling class. People, this is the most important thing that people do not understand. It would mean the end of ruling class hegemony. Because I tried to use the example, mainly because we've got a big race course very close to me. When you go to the races in England, you see the strata of society right there in front of you. It couldn't be more obvious that we have a ruling class because they always occupy the top tier seats. That's where the Queen goes, and that's where they have the steaks and champagne. You have the upper class below them who are still very wealthy people, but they don't have trillions. You have your middle class man who's having his prawn salad sandwiches, and then the vast majority of the working class at the bottom who are having a cup of warm beer on a on a summer's day here. And what you have to understand is that if the economies of the West were deliberately aimed at making everybody as wealthy as possible, you would get a situation where ordinary working men would be turning up in helicopters. And they'd be saying, well, look, it's raining. I don't want to stay out here. I want to go up into the, right up there in the gods with where the Queen is. And they would say, well, have you any idea how much those people are paying? They're paying £10,000 for one plate of steak. Well, if you've got it, and it's just one day in the year, there's every chance you might say, well, so what? I came in a helicopter. Here's £10,000. And the Queen would wind up standing next to bricklayers and men who work in shipyards. And they'd be saying, well, I'm going to take your seat. So it would mean the end of the privileges that Donald Trump and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and the Queen and all the rest of it, they are used to walking into the best seat. They only fly on private jets. They don't, never have to go on a commercial flight and wait in a queue. This was the point I wish I could have made at greater length in my film. This was the most important thing that Orwell was trying to get across to people. And I think that this is it always has been the most difficult thing for people to understand, is that it's all about hierarchy. It's all about the pyramidal system. It's all about, that pyramid with the all-seeing eye. It's all about that pyramid and the fact that if you have a society genuinely focused on creating wealth for ordinary people, then the man right at the very top, Orwell would explain this to you just as I have. He is going to cease to exist because he doesn't work. He doesn't have a profession. He doesn't have anything. He's just a ruthless ruler who kills people to stay at the top. And now that I've said that, Ricky, I'm going to tell you this video will probably be banned.
Yeah, well, look, knock on wood, I've been pretty lucky on YouTube that I've had a lot of controversial people on there. I think because I've never monetized and I always age restrict my stuff, that's been a huge thing. I don't want to be partners with YouTube. I don't want to take any money. I don't want to be business partners. And I tell people upload it and post it anywhere you want. It's all open source. I'm just trying to spread the conversations as far as possible. So far so good. It's helped.
That's what I've just explained there is the concept that they don't want the public to understand.
Well, what's really important.
Sorry?
I was going to say, and the thing is, why your point is so important is because we look at people in the U.S., look at Europe, and they look at England, and they're like, hey, they still have kings and queens. They have a monarchy. How silly is that? And I want to shake them and be like, we live in a monarchy. The only difference is we just don't call them kings and queens, and people don't realize that. The only difference is that we're tricked into believing we're not in one. Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
I think a lot of it's funny when people think that like it's almost like you've been it's like that quote, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked, and it's hard to convince them that like, hey,
what a great saying.
It's easy to see the monarchy when they're calling themselves kings and queens, but now we've been tricked that that's gone and we don't have a monarchy. But what you're saying is so important. I've had people, I know even people in the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project and people who are futurists will talk about how we have technology where everybody could basically not even work. Like you could just show up, hit a button hour a day, and we have enough technology to make everything productive enough where we could get all the food and have things built and shipped in a productive way where we wouldn't need to take advantage of people's labor the way we do. But the problem is that to have a ruling class, that means they need to have people to rule over. And
Exactly.
and the thing is, like, even the term, you talk about Orwell, the term Big Brother, which a lot of people use, the idea, like, people have to put in perspective what that means. That means that to keep a Big Brother in existence or necessary, we need to feel like we need their help, like that we can't do this on our own, that we're
Again, Ricky, you're making a
yeah.
fantastic point here, my friend. And something I would like to bring into this as well is that this is why people have got to understand that, first of all, you're talking about American kings and queens. The influence of primarily the British monarchy on their powerful partner, America. It's mainly the Queen and the royal family and the influence of the English barons that has created that in America. Had the English monarchy not been so immensely powerful, I think America could have grown by now into something that could much more genuinely call itself a republic. So that's one point. But the second thing I'd like to say is that this is why the British royal family in particular are responsible for, if you like, holding us in a time warp, because they do not want us to go forward. They do not want us to make progress. They want to hold Britain and the world, really, in a feudal era, because that's an era that they can rule over. When I was at school, one of the main events of my life that I can really remember so vividly, because this was 1968, let's not forget, was the first flight of Concorde. They had it on Tomorrow's World, this program that we used to have, and there was this sweet man. He'd been a Spitfire pilot in the Second World War, called Raymond Baxter, who had he had the most beautiful English brogue you could ever wish to see, and he's saying, Concorde flies, she flies. Look at her disappearing into the clouds. It made a big impact on me when I was, as I say, just this high. And Concorde then in 1968, for God's sake, you could get on it. I could get on it where I am now, and I could be talking to you at best 3.5 hours later. 3.5 hours, Ricky. Here we are now, and it takes 10 hours. We've gone backwards. And we've gone backwards mainly because, in spite of digital technology, we still haven't got a Concorde. We still haven't got supersonic travel. Come on, it's because they don't want us to have supersonic travel. They certainly don't want the skies to fill up with ordinary people, because they want to keep the skies to themselves. And why do they want to keep the skies to themselves? Because they're flying around in the air with little children to share as sex slaves. They don't want people to know that that's going on either. They want to keep international air travel all to themselves. And all because of this, we are being held in what is really a feudal structure. And it's because we have a feudal structure trying to get on with the digital age that we've got this topsy-turvy feeling, because the two just do not match at all. I said this on Truthzilla, and I'm going to say it again. This whole thing with monarchy is just an anachronism. We must find a way to move forward from it now. Must do.
Well, in England, it's still very much, and this is from my take from the outside, kind of looking in, but that hierarchy of which social class you're in is still very much important, right? Because I mean, even like for example, I've heard stories of people who they'll name, like, for example, your name's Francis Richard. Do you, that some people wouldn't want to name, like, use a nickname, because in England they might be like, oh, you're at the bottom of the class instead of the upper class uses their full name, like a Christopher Hitchens or a Richard Dawkins. You never have Richard Dawkins call himself like Rich or something like that. It's always like, if you're intellect, you use your full name, and it's, so there's still this thing where there's this classism where people will judge each other based on these little things on which class you're in. And where in America, there is that in America, but I wonder if, because of like the very open monarchy and still having kings and queens, if for some reason that maybe you're judged much more in that type of thing, like what you do for a living, or who your family is, or how much money you make. And you do get that in America, but it's different too, because I guess my perspective is from the East Coast, and I grew up in an immigrant filled part of the Massachusetts, where everybody I grew up with worked construction or worked at a factory. So you didn't see as much as that, where maybe if I lived somewhere where it was a little richer, I'd see much more of that class system. So maybe it is just from my personal experience. I mean, I pour concrete for a living. I'm around a lot of blue collar people. So you don't see it quite as, but there is this thing, even when you talk to your boss, right? Like, and this is to make a point that you made, like we almost talk to them like they're this up because they make more money and they have more authority, like they're this more intelligent person, or when we're surrounded by somebody who makes more money than us, we talk to them like in a more respectful manner, almost like their value is higher than ours. And I think we have to stop that shit, because like it's just because I don't, like I said, I pour concrete for a living. I've never stepped a foot in a college unless I'm pouring concrete at a college on a construction job site. And I don't ever judge somebody's judge or prejudge somebody based on how much money they make, or what they do for a living, or what their name is, or what their last name is, or whatever. It's all based on their ideas. Like, if people did that to me, nobody would come on my show, because what resume do I have? I'm a Portuguese immigrant who came to America, barely graduated high school, and now I do construction as my full-time job. Like, I don't have any reason to believe I have anything interesting to say, but yet I'm very glad to see that people like yourself, people who've done very influential documentaries like yourself, people who've written very influential books, people who have worked in the CIA, whistleblowers, have been willing to come on and share ideas with me.
Well,
and
Ricky,
that
this one thing I really want to, a big point I want to make here, is that you have no idea how terrified the people at the top are of you and of men like you. Andy Young, who interviewed me on Raconteurs News, I mean, when I asked him, about himself, he just said, "Oh, I'm a lorry driver. That's it." And he educated himself just by reading books while he was taking a break on the road. He was a long distance lorry driver, and it will be scaring the living daylights out of the elite more than anything else has ever done in history, because prior to when? I would say prior to 1965, 66 time, it wouldn't have mattered if a man who did the kind of work that you do wanted to educate himself. You probably couldn't have afforded to do it because books were too expensive, and they weren't that abundant either. They would. I mean, when I was a tiny child, the library that we had in my particular town, it just had a few children's books. It didn't have any Shakespeare. It didn't have any philosophy. It didn't have any Socrates. It didn't have anything that mattered. And it was, and I learned this from my aunties and uncles, it was an absolutely barefaced policy of the rich to keep the poor uneducated. I can remember like yesterday, when I was, I think, just 10 years old, my Auntie Mary talking to my father and my uncles, and she remembered an interview with Winston Churchill during the war where he didn't know he was being recorded. And he was saying to some lord, "My dear man, what are you talking about? You want to educate the working class? You'll make them as intelligent as you are. And what will you do then?" Because Churchill understood what all the, most intelligent leaders that we've had, or oligarchs we've had, understand, that education is the most important thing of all. And, you wouldn't believe how much it delights me. And if George Orwell was here, if we had a time machine and we could go and get him, and he could sit next to me now and listen to what you're saying, he'd be doing cartwheels. He would be absolutely doing cartwheels around the room because it was always so frustrating for him to see that, he always said, working men, they will never rebel. They'll never get off their backsides and fight for what is genuinely theirs because they've got nothing between their ears. But in his period, they never had an opportunity to use their minds. It just wasn't there. In today's world, with this, instrument that I've got in front of me now, because of computers, because of this information age, you can so easily educate yourself. And it's always self-educated men like you who are the strongest. You do not find really that people who've been to Eton and been to Westminster and then been to Oxford or Cambridge, they do not wind up being the cleverest people because they don't have your passion for learning. And it's the same with the Truezilla people, and it's the same with so many others. Oh, before I forget, I must give a little wave to a lovely lady called Gail Augier, who's been sending me some really useful links. And I'd like to say, give a little wave to Friday Chidlow. She knows why. Another lady who she stopped me in the street here, like many others, because she's a concerned mother. And I'd also like to give a little wave to a lovely lady called Ricky Grazia. I hope I pronounced her name correctly. She knows who she is. She's been writing me some lovely letters and telling me some wonderful things as well. She's a legal eagle. Because Gail Augier it's something I wanted to your audience to know about. She sent me a link, to oh God, what's the name of the it's a website called is it the Truth in Plain Sight? I nearly got that wrong. And this website, The Truth in Plain Sight, I don't know if you know about it. It put on the trailer for a movie called Songbird. Have you heard about this? Songbird.
Yeah. You sent me the link, and I watched the trailer for it.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. I sent you the link. Well, now you know. It's just that this movie, people are gonna wonder what the hell is going on here because it's the first pandemic movie, and how long have we had the pandemic? For Christ's sake,
We're still in it, right?
Well, yeah, but you could say it only really started to officially bite, if you like, back in February, and yet we've got this feature movie which has been written, cast, produced, and is now out, or is just about to be, in that space of time, and the people who do this website, I think they may have a point here because it is terrifying. It's a vision of the future in 2023, and they're saying that the COVID-23, it corresponds with the year, has now mutated, and you've got helicopters flying around saying you must stay indoors or you will be shot on sight. A lot of people are going to wonder, is that where we're going? That is where we're going. It is going to get that bad.
Have you watched Event 201?
I haven't. I've heard this.
Oh my God. Okay, well, the only thing scarier than this movie coming out is the fact that in November 2019, they recreated this exact event with the World Economic Forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and also the John Hopkins. I mean, a bunch of people were involved in this. And literally, it's the exact same scenario that played out. Everything from like having to suppress conspiracy theory websites and articles and researchers online to possible martial law in some places, to people being skeptical of a vaccine. Like, so it's very similar to September 11th when they said like, oh, we would have never guessed planes would have flew into the towers, but yet Bush had documents and papers saying that was a possibility. So he was obviously lying. similar thing where like everybody who,
Right.
yeah, what a surprise. And so similar thing where like everybody's like, oh, we couldn't have prepared for this. Nobody saw this coming. It's like, no, actually, you guys did see it coming. There was a event that recreated this beautifully and identically to how it actually happened. It was in the beginning of the documentary Plandemic. Have you watched Plandemic, the documentary?
I haven't been able to get around to that yet. I've been too busy with the book.
I will send it to you. It's worth the hour of your time. It is. It opens up right with this. So if you don't watch the rest of it, you can just this, first couple minutes, the small portion of it right in the beginning that shows you these clips from this event that was a recreation. They even got fake newscasters, all this stuff to kind of recreate what would happen if this happened. And even there's, I just had a documentary filmmaker on my last show who did a documentary called Wagging of the Dog, I think, and then it's like the story behind COVID-19 or something along those lines. But it that opens up with Dr. Fauci in 2017, the little video, which I don't know if you've seen either, in 2017, coming out and saying the next administration is going to have a huge outbreak or pandemic that they're going to have to deal with or whatnot. And this was 2017 on film, him saying this. So it's like there's all this evidence that they should have been prepared because they were already talking about it, discussing it, recreating like almost like a war game type of recreation of how it would play out in the world. So the fact that now people are like, oh, how would we have guessed? How could have we, prepared for this is complete nonsense. And it makes people, realize that, hey, well, all this stuff is a lie. The title of your documentary, everything's a rich man's trick. Usually, in very few cases, will I think that something is just a coincidence, that like, okay, that there's not maybe something more going on. And really, it's scary to think that. I mean, it's so. I remember I telling my wife about it, but when she sat down and actually watched it, and she realized how similar it was to, or how identical it was to what actually happened, and you actually see it play out, and a fake newscaster basically saying all the same things a real newscaster was saying at the time, it like blew her mind. I mean, I remember her looking at me, she's like, oh my God, I cannot believe this is like literally you would think that this is a video of like what actually happened because it was so identical. And so it's scary.
Ricky, that the Capricorn 1, the movie. Ever see that?
No, I haven't.
Well, it's Elliot Gould, who's very good in it, by the way. And it's basically just about the fake moon landings. The movie is about a fake mission to Mars. And there's a moment in it where Elliot Gould goes to see the wife of the commander of the spacecraft, because he's realized that the commander of the space mission has been trying to send her coded messages in a very clever way during the broadcasts. I won't spoil it for anybody who wants to watch it, but it's a great film, Capricorn 1, great film. But there's a moment where this wife of the space commander, she shows him some home movies that they'd taken at I think it's a place called Flat Rock that you Americans have, where they shoot cowboy films because it's a genuine Western town that's been left exactly as it was. And the point of showing it was that she's saying her husband couldn't get over how real everything looked, and he couldn't get over that just by having those cameras that could move up and down and swivel and one thing or other, that you could take something that was so fake and make it look so real. And that's the point of the whole film. That's the point of the whole movie. And people, even now, even some of the most in tune and aware people, Ricky, are still not aware, I think, of just how all-pervading the trickery is. The trickery is in absolutely everything we know. I want people to start walking through life saying to themselves, okay, I was just told something. Whether it was the radio, it was the TV, or I heard someone say it in a bar, or it doesn't matter. Whenever you hear anything, say to yourself, right, that's a lie. And until I've got the proof that it isn't, I'm going to go on thinking it's a lie about everything, even the tiniest little things, because the degree to which our culture has become a lie is still something that I think most people are not aware of. And, you know, I might as well add something to, oops, we've had a,
Yeah, no, I just sent you the link to the website.
And I might as well add something to the point I made at the start about the deep state not existing and the whole thing being a phantom. Because again, it's all about detail. Once my movie had taken hold, and once it had gone viral, I can't speak to that either. we've both got the same disease. You're passing it on to me.
It's contagious.
Gone viral, Ricky. There was this whole thing that started on the public comments sections below so many different versions of my film, and people were saying, oh, it was all the same thing. Oh man, Jesus, you know, I'm awake now. I've woken up now. They were all saying, oh, Mr. Conolly, thank you so much for your movie. I didn't even know what reality was, but I'm awake now. And this thing started where people were saying, and it was always in inverted commas, we've got woke culture now. That was being passed around everywhere. We're no longer being fooled by the rich man's news broadcasts. We can see through them now. We're part of woke culture. Well, just recently, and again, you see, this is why it's all terribly confusing. Well, I don't want to say confusing. This is why it interests me what Piers Morgan does, because there's no bigger offender than him over this. Because just recently, he was on the breakfast show and he was saying, oh yeah, it's becoming such a problem, this woke culture thing. There's so many people who are so politically correct now, and they go on and on and on about racism and feminism and all this LGBTXYQUZ bollocks that they keep talking about. And I'm saying, whoa, hang on a minute, what's he saying there? And you see, what they've actually done is, because they're so afraid of what is genuinely woke culture, what you are part of, what the Zillas are part of, they're so scared of people being skeptical about every news broadcast that the intelligence people have tried to taint that and twist it and dirty it. And they're trying to make out that being part of woke culture means that you think like the people who deliver the mainstream news, who never stop going on and on and on about black people's rights and gay rights and, you know, transgender rights and all of the stuff that's just junk that they're trying to put in your head every day as just as a distraction. I mean, that I don't know if it's the same for you in America. I imagine it is. But all the mainstream news does here is just go on and on and on and on and on, trying to convince everybody that everybody's a racist, everybody's a feminist, everybody isn't showing enough respect to this group or that. Everybody's against Islam, yakety yakety. And I've noticed just recently there's so many people putting public comments on saying, I am sick to death of hearing about Muslims and blacks and gays, and because it's all the mainstream ever talk about. And I want people to understand that the reason that they talk about it is simply because they're trying to lead you by the nose away from every issue that's serious and just clutter your head up with nonsense so that you can't think straight. That's what it's all about. Thank you for getting that off my chest.
It isn't also a part of divide and conquer, because that's the other thing too. Yeah.
Exactly. You couldn't have finished that off any better. You know, as ever, they, you know, if they go on and on and on and on about black people this, gay people this, transgender that, on and on and on about that, then they're creating a situation in people's minds where you always have the black man against the white man, where you have men against women, where you have gay against straight, where you have color against white, where you have Arab against Jew, and constantly, as you say, it's all about, make people fight with each other, make people think that they can't trust each other, make people believe that we're not just all one family on Earth, and that there's hardly any difference between anybody anymore on this Earth. I mean, there are still, I would say, there are still real differences of outlook between people in the Arab world and the rest of the world. There's still real differences of outlook, even in Europe, between, say, Italians who do not look at the world as certainly as the British do. But those real differences of outlook are not sufficient that we should, distrust each other. As you say, it's all about divide and rule to the bitter end. It's all about making people think the wrong things every day.
Well, your example of the race and people being at the race and it being almost a perfect way to kind of show the hierarchies in society. It's also a good example for people to kind of have a mental image of kind of what's going on and talking about divide and conquer. Because if you and I were at the bottom of that race and we're looking up and we're like, F those people up there. Like they're the ones sucking all the money. They can't give me a raise. I can barely make ends meet. And they're, like you said, eating steak and expensive bottles of wine or whatever. And if me and you were sitting next to each other, right, we would eventually be like, you know what, they're the enemy because they don't care about me down here. But the way to prevent us from having that discussion would be like, hey, how about we get the people down there, instead of looking at us and focusing their energy and anger and some of their misfortunes, don't focus that on the people up there who have all the money, but focus on each other. So let's get these people at the bottom. They'd be like, hey, Francis is I don't know what religion you are, if you're religious at all. Yeah, I'm not either. But for I guess just for the sake of this example, if you were Jewish and I was Muslim, let's get those guys down there to fight. So then they don't focus, they don't realize that we're the ones who are really screwing them up there. Hey, you guys, that person next to you who is at the same class, in regards to money and salary and whatnot, you guys are the enemy to each other. You're the ones who should be fighting amongst each other. They're the ones who are preventing you. It's the Muslims, or it's the Jews, or it's the gays, or it's the straights, or it's the.
This is why in my first interview, I think it was in my very first interview on the Richie Allen show, I tried to thank that Canadian lady who's a professional writer called Cheryl, because this was the point that she made, was that she got a bit irritated that one or two people on the public comment section seemed to be missing the point. And she's saying, look, for God's sake, what Mr. Conolly's done here is to make it obvious that we've all got a common enemy and that everything is rigged to try and make us not see that we all have that enemy. And as you've just said, that the point is you don't see who your enemy really is, because your enemy is not the Jew, it's not the Arab, it's not the black man. It's not the gay. It's not the woman who wants independence. We all have the same enemy, and that enemy is the Queen and her friends and the Clintons and the Trumps.
You see it here with like people bring up the Mexicans. They're like, oh, those Mexicans taking all our jobs, and I'm like, I'm like, out of all your issues, I think Mexicans taking your job are the least of your worries. Like, how about the government taking your rights away, your freedoms away, forcing you to wear a mask, or not letting the small business be open without putting expensive plexiglass everywhere and having limited people in the building? Or how about, the fact that corporations are paying off politicians so they can put poison in our water or poison in our food or whatever. I'm like, those are your enemies. It's not the Mexican who's trying to come here because their country is equally, if not more, corrupt, and they're trying to come here for a better life. I'm not saying that criminals don't come from other countries into a country and you can pinpoint like, hey, look, this Mexican became a criminal because and look, this is an example of the issues of them coming here. No, I agree. There's going to be in all cases you're going to find an example of criminals going from one country to another country, and that's going to happen. But it's not a major problem. It's almost like in America, something that's silly, but it's kind of a similar and just similar conversation. The third bathroom thing, right? There was this big conversation about should businesses put a third bathroom for the whatever gender or whatever it may be. So you have people fighting about this, and it's nonsense. It's like it's such a small
waste of time.
Yeah, and it's such a small percentage of the population that it would affect or is affected by this or whatever, or even should be even discussing this, that like, why would you focus your energy on that? Same thing with like the Mexican thing, but it's from the right. It's, because the third bathroom thing is more of a left issue, and then this is more of a right issue, but both of them are being confused that these things are big issues when really there's bigger issues.
Exactly, Rick. And you see, this is why, again, to go back to journalists, when I was on with the Truthzillas, I did very bluntly say there's this big issue with journalists. Are they wicked or are they just stupid? I do wonder whenever they have to talk about crap like third bathrooms, are they never looking at the auto cue and thinking to themselves, Jesus Christ Almighty, this is garbage. But I mean, if you're Piers Morgan, and he's probably earning £2 million, and that £2 million. I mean, the pound is still worth a lot more than the dollar. That's a lot of bread. That's a lot of money. I mean, in some ways, I mean, I don't want to say you can understand, but you can see why he might be willing to just go on and on and on retailing this crap simply because he's rolling in dough. But those people who I have called whores flat out, and I'm going to do it again. If you're working for BBC, ITV, NBC, ABC, Fox News, it doesn't matter. If you're a cameraman, a producer, a writer, anything, in this age, you are a whore of the ruling class. You might not think so. You might be saying, well, Mr. Conolly, I just go to work, pay the mortgage. I'm not responsible for what's on the auto cue. I just read it out. Well, it's not a good enough excuse anymore. You can see with your own eyes in the street that people are wearing face masks. You're queuing for bread. We're watching the Western world, as we know it, go down in flames. When I would like to ask everybody in the mainstream media, where will you stop? What will you not do when you are ordered to do it? Which stories, which fake news stories will you not put out there? How fake do they have to get? How fake does a story have to be before somebody working for Fox News or ABC or NBC or whatever, how fake does it have to be? Especially after things like, with Amy Robach and saying, well, we had the whole thing with Clinton and we had the pictures, we had all that, and they wouldn't let us put it out.
Isn't it crazy how that story just disappeared? Like nobody made it big. No. People like it was like a conversation for like a day, and I'm like, this is a example of how stuff gets suppressed, and how if something is actually exposing somebody in power, how it won't come out. And you need independent journalists and researchers and people who are, the Whitney Webbs, the James Corbett's, the people who do some good research and exposes some of the stuff. It's even Alex Jones. I mean, even though he's done some harm, he's been right with about a lot of stuff too. Sometimes
I did say that that you see, again, going back, Ricky, to making sense. And I've said many times now that in the beginning, I think Alex Jones was just, if you give him credit, a tough guy who wasn't afraid to speak his mind. And it's actually one of the great sadnesses, I think, that he has so very obviously been corrupted. But it is very obvious that he's been reduced to the level of that Senkuga who he had that fake fight with. But Americans have got to realize that these things are all orchestrated by men like Roger Stone. As soon as Alex Jones got into bed with Roger Stone, I was like, oh, God, no, they've done it again. More corruption. Roger Stone is the dirtiest American. If there was some kind of scale. You could measure things by.
He's been on my show twice.
He's been on your show to us. Well,
Yeah.
he is American politics. It
yeah,
is
he is.
tricksters like him who have made American political life into what it is. American political life is just about dirty tricks. I mean, look at the the movie All the President's Men, where they went to interview Donald Segretti. I mean, they had a man who was going all around the country, planting fake letters, fake press releases, fake this, fake that. That goes all the way back to, my God, what, 1971, 1972? They've been doing it forever. American politics is just about dirty tricks. And the dirty tricks have becoming more and more obvious.
Roger Stone says it himself. I mean, he says politics isn't beanbag. It's not. I mean, he's really good at playing a game that's really dirty. You know what I mean? It's one. You know, it's one of those things where, like, and this is kind of makes the point that you make. You can't make it ahead in politics unless you accept the fact it's a dirty game. You're going to do dirty things, and you're going to have to do things that are morally questionable. So, you know, without a doubt, I mean, I've had people on that, like Jack Abramoff, for example, who was the focus of the documentary Casino Jack. There was also an HBO movie that Kevin Spacey played him called Casino Jack, and he was one of these lobbyists. Same thing. I don't agree with a lot of his things he's done, but I had him on because he was exposing and talking about somebody who was actually in the inside, how easy it is to corrupt the system, or how corrupt the system is in general, and how easy it is to take advantage of it. So I think, you know, it is one of those things where even somebody like Roger Stone, who better to sometimes talk about how messed up the whole system is, or how dirty the whole game is, than somebody who's really good at playing that dirty game, you know. And you know, when I had him, he is very fascinating in regards to, like, he's delved very deep into the JFK assassination. The first time he was on to talk about that. The second time he was on, probably on more because of political motivations, but he was on
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, he was on to talk about his Clinton book, the one about the Clintons, and this was I think right before the election or whatnot. So even though I know that, like, okay, the Clinton book, the timing of it, the reason why he's promoting it right now is obviously because he's pushing to help his friend Donald Trump. But in that book, if there's good information and you're exposing another corrupt person, then I think it's worth discussing and talking about. And this is one thing that I think is a really important point, which I've made on the show many of times. A lot of times people will critique the source and ignore what the person is saying or what the article is exposing. So, for example, if a really right-leaning person exposes some left-leaning corruption, right? If they expose somebody on the left that's corrupt, somebody might say, well, he's biased, or he's and I'm like, you're right. He's very biased, and he might have some political motivation on why he's trying to expose this person. But just because his moral compass isn't perfect, is what he's saying true? And if it is, then I'll consider it. You know, and many times, because I'm sure sometimes you'll talk about something and people will be like, oh, that website's left leaning, or that newspaper's right leaning, or that's
I hear what you're saying, and it is it is a very important point. I have come across people, even worked with people who are respected and admired, who, and I've always said to them, you must never close your mind, ever. You cannot be an intellectual, and you can't do intellectual things if you ever close off an avenue of your mind. I mean, I knew a man who I respected immensely, very bright man, very hardworking man, and somehow I can't remember how, we wound up watching a bit of a comedian who we have here. I don't know if you've heard of him, called Chubby Brown. Have you heard of Chubby Brown? He's notorious, absolutely notorious, for being just about the most offensive comedian. He makes Jim Jeffries look like a priest.
I'm gonna have to look into him, because it sounds like something that's right down my avenue.
I'll tell you how I'll give you an example of how bad it gets. What would be a good example? There was, I heard a story about him. Funnily enough, when I was working on a building site many, many, many years ago, just very briefly, I was building doing the engineering on a flood barrier, and he went to do a gig in a converted church. This is when he was just starting out, and he was told that there'd been a theft the week before of a video recorder and a big TV, flat screen TV set. This was in the days when flat screen TVs, big ones, were quite new, and it was a major thing, So that the being religious people, maybe they were a bit gullible, but they'd put the video and the huge TV screen in the church, thinking it would be safe, and it was stolen. You see, and there's this very expensive piece of equipment someone's just shelled out for, and it's gone. Well, when he came to do the gig, there was he got up on the stage and he realized there was this huge effigy of Christ on the cross that someone had moved sort of from the center to the side wall. So you've got this, image like this. And the first thing he did was to come on stage and say, "Oh, I see you got the bastard who nicked your video." So, and I thought, well, but I thought that was funny. But later on, are Americans aware of the Bradford fire at all?
I remembered
the Bradford football ground fire. Well, that was the worst thing I've ever seen with my own eyes.
What year was that?
That is a very, very good question. It's a long time ago. That must be going back to. It must be going back to the 90s or even early 80s. But it was an appalling thing to witness, even if you were just watching it on television. Heaven knows what it must have been like for the people who were there. Because basically an entire football stand caught fire. It was wood. Crazy, Somebody must have thrown a cigarette butt or something down below the seating. And what was so incredible about it was that the fire started at one end. And the police could see this was going to get dodgy, and they were telling everybody to just get the hell out of it. Get on the pitch, get away with it. And suddenly, the flame just went whoosh right along the entirety. Firemen understand this. The wood gets hot and hotter and hotter and hotter, and suddenly it becomes like a tinderbox. And within the space of a few seconds, woof, there was this fireball, a size of which it was beyond belief. And it was so hot that the people who had been running to escape started to catch fire. There was one particularly harrowing shot that the TV pictures caught of a man in a Mac, and he just burst into flames, almost like spontaneously. And the police were beating out the flames, and it was just horrible. Children on fire, policemen on fire, their hair on fire. It was really terrible. The worst thing, as I say, I've ever with my own eyes seen, and I think it would be true for most other people. Well, Chubby Brown came on stage, and in Bradford just a few days later, and said, "I'm really sad you didn't invite me to your barbecue." Well, that's not funny. I mean, there was hundreds. Well, I don't think there's hundreds, but there was a lot of children died with their fathers, and that's the trouble. You see, it's a bit of you might call it a Joan Rivers problem. Where is the line between sick and comedians would say there's never a line.
Yeah, and
we have freedom of speech. But this man, as I say, he wouldn't he would not countenance anything that Chubby Brown said. That for him, because he was such a decent man, that was his own barrier. He said, I just will not listen to a single thing that dirty, foul-mouthed, offensive comedian will say ever about anything. And I was actually sad about that because Chubby Brown has done some things that a thinking man, I think, should think about. You know, I mean, what if the person who you hate the most in the world happens to say the most important truth that you should hear?
Good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, it's
Is everybody who's your audience, all your fans, all your listeners, please think about that. Never close your mind.
yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, in regards to comedy, I think the reason why a lot of comedians would say there isn't a line is because I think intentions are important. If somebody is attempting to be funny, then even if they offend somebody, I think it's okay because your line, like for example, that might be your line where you're like, okay, this is my line, but somebody
Yeah,
else's line might
exactly.
be might
Yeah,
be might he might have crossed that line a long time ago when he was saying stuff that you don't even find offensive. So it's
yeah,
like there's always going to be somebody who's offended. I mean, Bill Burr is a good example. He's from Massachusetts. In the East Coast, we have a lot of like blue collar humor in regards to like we're thicker skin. It seems like because we a lot of us work construction, we do these type of jobs, so it's one of those things where we we I don't know, when you're not in an office scenario, you're much more likely to hear more dirtier jokes and stuff like that.
yeah.
You know,
Say it,
you
go
don't,
on.
yeah, you
No,
don't have, yeah, you don't have to
there's
be as
nothing
politically
like
correct.
there's nothing as wonderful as building site humor. The, the
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the best jokes I've ever heard in my life have been from those kinds
Oh,
of
same here.
men. They've got the
Yeah,
greatest
well,
wit. And
here's
that's
what.
what I mean again about never closing your mind to anything, because if you can't accept that there is such a thing as building site humor, then you know you're missing out on on a very
Well, here.
important aspect of life.
Well, here's what I'm going to tell you, one that has stuck with me for a long time. It's hilarious and it's short, and I don't think I've ever told a joke on the show, so I'm going to do it
No,
now.
you go ahead.
Yeah. So this is one I heard a long time ago. So how do you know when your girlfriend's getting fat?
I've no idea. How do you know when your girlfriend's getting fat?
When she fits in your wife's clothes. How good is that, right? That's hilarious. You know, but that's only something I would hear at a construction job site. I would never hear that if I was in a cubicle, you know, where I have to be politically correct. But it's those type of like you don't worry about offending anybody when you're at a construction job site. Like everybody just
Exactly.
swearing, you know,
Yeah.
and there is, I mean, it's almost closer to the way people really are. You know, I always make the argument like around my kids, if my kids, I mean, they're going to hear swears eventually, and when they repeat them, I don't make it a big deal because it's like it's as long as they know that they shouldn't be saying it, you know, especially in a school atmosphere or whatever. I'm okay with it. They're just words, you know, if a lot of times their intentions of saying it is because they know they're going to get a rise out of you, or they think they're going to get a laugh out of you, so they're not saying it because they're trying to
Well,
be
this is
mean.
another reason, Ricky, excuse me in interjecting,
Yeah, yeah.
why I'm so dismayed and despondent about the mainstream media, because one of the things they've mainly pushed, and Piers Morgan is the biggest offender with this by far, is this whole thing about, oh, we mustn't say the N word. Well, I was fascinated. How long ago is it now? It must be nearly a decade that Chris Rock saw this happening and went on stage, and he's got a black audience, and the first thing he says is, we've got all this unrest between blacks in this country, and we've got niggers on one side and black people on the other, and niggers have got to go. And he even said, I'm so fed up with them, I wish they'd let me join the Ku Klux Klan. Well, Jesus, how could any black man say that? But I really admired him saying it, because it was such a funny joke. And the thing is that, with the mainstream media have trying to create this atmosphere, it seems to me, where what they're really saying is, if you want to be able to tell the truth, especially, or tell a truth, let's say, about black people, well, you've got to be black to do it. Well, if that's the case, what happened to freedom of speech for white men like you and me? If you can't, I would say to all your listeners, all your fans, never let anyone control your own personal lexicon. If I had to put it in print and I thought I needed to use the word nigger, I would do it. It's just a word. John F. Kennedy said that. Lenny Bruce said that. It is just a word. And it's just another rich. It's just
Well,
another part of this race. You mustn't be a racist thing, you know?
yeah, well, again, it's divide and conquer. It's getting us to fight about these things, and yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with the idea that like words are just words. It's not something. How people intentions to me are much more important. In regards to jokes, and I mean, and that's a beautiful thing about comedy is that they can say things that many people are thinking, but because they're trying to make you laugh, it's much more acceptable, and they don't get it.
Well, George Carlin. I mean, look at the value of George Carlin's comedy now more
Oh, I
than
know.
ever. And where would he have been if he hadn't have been able to take Lenny Bruce's mantle and say just whatever he wanted? And this, Ricky, how pervasive this can be is something that people at times I think don't appreciate. I was fascinated recently when I was on YouTube to pick up on this thing that's going on in America right now and which is not being documented by British mainstream media, and it should be, because I think it's a sea change, if you like, which I think is a really important part of America's history. And it's this phenomenon I'm sure you know about wherein black men apparently are saying they've just had it with black women and they just won't date them anymore because they perceive them as not feminine, not genteel. They're saying black women, they just want to fight all the time, scream at you all the time, and all the rest of it. And when I first picked up on this, and at that time I had just been to London to see the head of ITV, and I'd just been to London just before that to see the head of Channel 4, the top people in broadcasting in Britain. And I offered to make a program about this because I felt it was important, and they wouldn't countenance it. They wouldn't wear it at all. And not long after that, I picked up a video that was made by a black lady lawyer who was very bright, very articulate. She sat there with this lovely white jumper on, with these glasses, and she couldn't have been more educated and urbane. And she was trying to say to black women in America, look, dears, you've got to face the fact, and that is your own men don't want you anymore. You've got to face this. You've got to face what I think in your country is called the hood rat slut culture. We don't have this here at all. But she's saying, black women have reached a point where we're just not attractive women anymore as a group. And she said one of the most devastating things I've ever heard in my life. You talk about the power of language. She said, face this statistic. She said, at this moment in time, 50% of black American women have got herpes but no husband. Now, I mean,
Yeah, but
that
isn't this
really was powerful to me, and she's saying that genuinely to try and do some good, and we've created a culture. Mainstream media have created a culture where I, as a documentary maker, as a filmmaker, as an artist, and it would be the same for you if you offered your services to them, we wouldn't be allowed to take that reality and say that on the screen. I mean, I want to make it very plain to anybody who's just heard me say that. They were not my words. That was not a white man speaking. I'm quoting a black lady lawyer. And if she's saying that, then really we should be able to discuss this like adults on a media platform. But you can't do it on BBC because it's just not PC at the moment. It's ridiculous. It's
yeah,
just stopping discourse
and dialogue and conversations and sharing ideas. And I mean, the thing is, like, even though I do think that the root cause, and this goes back to what we were saying previously about history, I think that's the symptom. But why? Well, what's causing that, I think, is a much greater conversation, a much more intriguing conversation. Because I think you look at historically in the U.S., there was, you know, what the African American community, the Black community, they without a doubt had specific, the elite had specific ways to make sure they did grow up in one family or one parent families, that they did lock up many Black males. They did create this culture. I mean, this is a deep, but these are discussions. I mean, regardless, you know, where we stand on what caused it or what may have caused it, your point remains the same, and I think a valid one, that these discussions should be able to just be listened to, and people should still have the freedom to discuss them. If we agree or disagree, that's different, but we should all agree on the fact that regardless if you agree or disagree with somebody, their voices should be heard. I've said this a lot lately, and I think it's because it's a reoccurring theme and a reoccurring problem with censorship and all this PC culture, that the way you fight bad ideas is with good ideas. You don't suppress them, you know. And I think so, regardless where anybody stands on anything. I mean, who was that guy who was he was on RT America. He was kind of known for being this real racist white guy who's kind of been banned everywhere. And then on RT America, they or no, I mean, it wasn't it was RT that had a show. I forget what it's called.
RT, I know, Ricky. RT is another thing, you know, because I'm sure that they're oligarch controlled, and yet sometimes, just sometimes,
they do. Yeah. Well, they had this guy on. He was this British. He was this British.
I don't know if you've seen it, but oh God, what again? Names? No, it's Afshan Rattansi, because Afshan Rattansi he does the British RT, and I tried to get in touch with him so many times, and I know other people have, and you know, it became obvious because he was one of the worst sellers of the London terrorism of all. The RT UK was determined to make you believe in the Westminster bridge attack in particular. So he definitely isn't to be trusted. And yet he had Ari Ben-Menashe, who Whitney Webb has talked about so wisely, on the show. And that was a fascinating interview. Why? Again, this doesn't make sense to me. Why he did such a good job interviewing Ari Ben-Menashe. But what came out of that was that Ari Ben-Menashe, when he was asked about Prince Andrew, he said, oh, yeah, I mean, he was just a useful idiot. that was it. No more than that. Yeah. He said, this man's, for those who don't know, was Israeli intelligence. He worked for Mossad. He was on the inside. He knew all about the Maxwells. And he said with the whole Epstein thing that all Prince Andrew was just a useful idiot. People wanted to meet him, so that was a way of getting people entangled with the fascist octopus. And that was all, you know, that's all there was to Prince Andrew. And that's not exactly, it's not a recommendation, is it, exactly, to hear from an Israeli intelligence agent that one of the royal princes is just a useful idiot. You know?
Yeah, so it was Tommy Robinson, and he was on Worlds Apart.
Oh, it's Tommy Robinson. Well, he's you see, people don't know what he is. He's MI5.
Well, he's really?
MI5. Oh, that's a double agent, as clearly as you could, as much as you could ever want a double agent. He is one. He was there to sell Islam or Islamic terrorism to us.
I wouldn't doubt that one bit, but he was banned on all social media accounts, platforms, or whatnot. And Worlds Apart, they say, well, Worlds Apart actually had him on, right? And she questioned him and she grilled him a little bit and kind of pushed back a little bit. And I thought that, you know, regardless, even though he was playing, you know, a role, the fact that they were willing to have him on instead of just saying like, no, we're not having this person on because he's this or that or whatever. my point is that that's how we should handle controversial people. Have them on your show, talk to them, let them put out their ideas.
Yeah.
If their ideas suck or they
Yeah,
make very
exactly.
little sense,
People see
then
it. Yeah.
yeah, people see it. Exactly. You know, so I think that's
If they're an idiot, people see they're an idiot. I mean,
eh,
they had Boris Johnson on the Have I Got News for You program here, which again is a means of control. It's there to make people think that we've got freedom to criticize those in power when we don't really at all. But they had Boris. This is one of the reasons that why I can hardly believe even now. And I suppose the real reason is people have got bad memories. But they had Boris Johnson on that show, and he was just right there in the camera with his face answering questions. And he wasn't faking it. I mean, the man is just stupid. He's just a joke. He's an imbecile. He absolutely is the buffoon that so many people have made him out to be. And so we've now got an absolute imbecile as the Prime Minister of Britain. And people think he's really the one in charge, that he's really running things. It's not true, Ricky. The people who own the banks run the UK, not the politicians. The politicians, every one of them, are just stooges. Every one.
yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, when you look at just the power of debt and money and all the things that they constantly get in trouble with in regards to, you know, laundering money knowingly for drug cartels or doing this or doing that. I mean, it's scary. But so before we wind this down, I do want to. There are going to be some people, even though your movie I think has been watched by many people, there might be a small portion of the listeners who haven't watched it. I remember when it went viral, like people were talking about it on podcasts, people were sending it to each other. It kind of reminds me, because I just had Mickey Willis on not too long ago, who had the Plandemic documentary, and he's the one who did the Plandemic documentary, and that went like kind of viral overnight also. Where's the best place for people who are listening who haven't seen it? Where's the best place to watch it, and where's it available?
Well, the situation for anybody who's, and I'm glad you've done this, Ricky, because I'm sure you remember when I was on Charlie Robinson that he asked me things I have been asked before on the Richie Allen show, but I was saying to him, you know, there's a hell of a lot of new people coming into this all the time. There's a hell of a lot of new people waking up all the time. And there's young kids who are starting to be truthers and one thing and another. So we've got to always try to, you know, make allowances for anybody who is a newbie to this. So I want them to know that once my film had gone viral and become this blockbuster thing that was going all over the world, and you know, the establishment just didn't know what the hell to do. It was at that point that it got banned. They took down my original, and it was around the same time that I was on the Andy Young show, and he told me that it had been underreported by 200 times, and really it had been watched over 1 billion times, and that might even be 2 billion now. It really is only the oligarchs who know how intense the interest has been in my film. But the ban continued, and you can't see the original, but a lot of very shrewd people saw the ban coming, and they started uploading pirate copies. Now, some of those pirate copies even have disappeared. When I was on the Jason Goodman show, I was very grateful to him that he zoomed in on a copy that was put on by a man called Shane Seavey. In actual fact, Shane Seavey put it on twice, and that had huge hits. And I was very grateful because there was somebody on there who said, when I tried to watch this, the FBI came to my door and offered me drugs not to watch it. You know, I mean, that's how serious it was all getting. But the Shane Seavey one, it was watched massively, and then it disappeared. There were several others that disappeared. So people started putting it out even under different titles. I always have this problem of trying to remember the Latin title that somebody dreamed up, which was Diaboli Ordinati Intrepidi. there's still that version is still out there, and you can still see that. But the best ones to see now, and gives me the opportunity to give him a little wave. Hello, Alexander Ravella, my dear friend. Alexander Ravella, if you want to look at that copy, that is still there. And the reason I like that copy is that the public comments are very genuine on that particular version, because over and over and over and over again, people are saying this should be shown in every school in America, in every college in America, and it should be shown to everybody throughout the entire world because it's so important. So I would say at the moment, if you're looking for my film, put in the full title and then put in Alexander Ravella. His version is a good version. It's a complete version. If you're looking for my film, you need a version which is 3 hours and 27 minutes long. That's the full version. There is another version that's on The Road to Freedom, I think, is the website, and there's another complete version, I think, on Truth Be Told on that platform. But they're the only three left that I know about, and I'm very intensely grateful to those people.
So where was it initially on when you first released it? Where was it released?
When it was first done, the man who I made it with made our own or his own website. And it went out on that. And as I say, when it was banned, all they did was send him, because he questioned it, and all they did was send a letter back saying that this movie has been banned in this country, that country, and even that was crazy, Ricky. I mean, it was banned in Belize, but not in Honduras. It was banned in France, but not in Italy. I think. It was just ridiculous, and it was just so obvious that this was totalitarianism, and that this was exactly the George Orwell dystopia that Orwell predicted. This is, the elites who rule the whole world, censoring anything that they think is dangerous.
Yeah, without a doubt, and that's why many of us put tape on our cameras on our phones and stuff. Because I mean, it sounds, if this was when computers first started becoming popular, or webcams or whatever, people would think that we're paranoid. But now with all the evidence and all the things coming through, it's like we're not paranoid at all. We're probably should be more paranoid when you really think about how much of what we're doing is being tracked and listened to and whatnot. So
I'll just make one more point in wrapping this up then, Ricky.
Yeah, please.
The reason that I do what I do was that I could not get over it when I first read 1984. In 1984, I'd read it as a child, but that was like at school. But I waited until 1984 to read the book, and it knocked me off my feet. It knocked me upside down, because I thought, well, my God, what he's giving me here, well, this is the world I live in, and I could see that other people could not see this, and I want your audience to hear this. Everything that we are going through now with the pandemic, Brexit, the Prince Andrew's child abuse, absolutely everything, Orwell predicted it. They may not believe that, but everything that is wrong with us, with our society, with the Western world, everything that's been wrong since the Second World War and since he died, he predicted everything. And I wish I could make another movie to explain why. And I hope one day that I will.
Yeah. Without a doubt. I think that you look at so many of people in the past, even like you said, George Carlin, Orwell. I mean, so many of Mark Twain. How many old quotes we find make just as much sense today as they did when they were written. So I think it tells you something about how even though our environments change, our problems are the same, So we might have technology, we might have instead of riding horses, we might have cars or whatnot, but a lot of our issues and our psychology and
because the structure of society doesn't change.
Exactly.
It's because we still got the same hierarchy that we had when there was a pharaoh sat on top of a pyramid, and
Yep.
when there was and when Caesar was, doing this or doing this to the men in the Roman Colosseum. The society, the structure of it, has not changed since then. That's what every American listening to your show should make as their goal in their life, is to get rid of that structure. And for Americans in particular, I would say, the last time I was interviewed was just a few weeks ago on the Truthzilla show, when I was going through American sayings that kind of like break my heart. And the one that breaks my heart the most is the way that you all say that good guys finish last. Americans have got to create a country where good guys finish first. Men like you, nice guys. That is the country. All this thing about, get your money, get your private jet, get your private yacht, be greedy. There's nothing wrong with that. It's those values that you need to get rid of. And because you'll go on and on and on having the same problems until the day that you create an America where good men finish first and not last. Because all it's doing, the American way is the wrong way. All it does is create thugs and criminals. You see, this is why I brought up this whole thing with Megan on Truthzilla, because the Europeans, they just don't know. I mean, to be told you've got to pay $30,000 just to have a baby, it makes the whole issue of money into the primary point of every American's life. You've got to have money, you've got to have lots of money. It's far easier to wind up selling your soul in a situation like that.
Well, it's funny you say this, because one of my biggest, I'd say one of the good things about me, about my characteristic and who I am as a person, is also sometimes I feel like is one of my biggest flaws. When I came to America, money was always something that was concerning, because my parents were, they were uneducated. They came to America. They were working, basically jobs that didn't pay very well. So my mother was it's almost like my mother was somebody who lived through the Great Depression, because my wife's grandmother lived through the Great Depression, and because of it, money is like the number one topic, always a concern. And when I was growing up, it was the same thing. Like, I could never have anything nice. We could never spend any money on anything that was just for pleasure or enjoyment. You shouldn't even be doing anything that's for just pleasure or enjoyment, because you should be focused on how can you make more money? How do you get ahead financially? And it became such to me, like, it was such a negative aspect of my upbringing, because I'm just like, I don't care about money. I don't want it to be my end all be all reason to breathe and live every day. And because of it, I've gone in the complete other extreme, where now today I spend as little as time as possible. I attempt to spend as little as time as possible thinking about money, worrying about money, talking about money.
That's probably why you're happy.
It probably is why I smile a lot and I'm happy. But to me, it brings, it just brings stress, anxiety. They have studies where they've shown that people who make, and I forget what the exact number is, but anywhere between like 60, 70, 80, something like that, $1,000 a year. Anybody, like, it increases, your happiness increases until that point, and then after that point, it doesn't bring you any more happiness. And I think the study is actually flawed, because I think what the study should be saying is that up to that point, making money will relieve some stress of not having it. It doesn't bring you happiness. It just relieves some stress. And then once you get to that point, you're like, okay, now that the stresses of, am I going to eat? Am I going to pay my bills? All that's gone. And then you can maybe enjoy life a little bit more. But it doesn't ever bring you happiness. I think the reason, and something that you said that I say all the time, this sabotaged American dream, this idea that, that if you get this white picket fence and this beautiful house and this new car, it'll bring you happiness, and that every person is the same, that same formula is supposed to bring happiness to everybody, regardless what you're, it is insanity. And I think that's why you see this increase. And in the UK, you saw, what was it, when investment bankers were jumping out of windows and committing suicide. You see it here. in the U.S. with, just people self-medicating with alcohol or anti-anxiety medication or whatever it may be, pills, drugs, whatever it may be, because they're unhappy, and we've been told to find happiness in the wrong places. Some of the people you bring up, Orwell, George Carlin, they had some sense of success. Mark Twain. But they weren't motivated by money. Nikola Tesla, for example, he's an example I use quite often. These people weren't motivated by financial gain. They were motivated by their work. They're motivated by, their art. And when people are motivated by that, then success will sometimes come afterwards. But it's never the greatest thinkers, the greatest dreamers, inventors, musicians, artists. Usually, and I'm sure there's some exception to the rule, but 90% of the time, if not 99% of the time, they're motivated by their work. They're motivated by their passion, their thing. And that's why it's so important to not get caught up in this. There's this American philosopher. He's a Harvard philosopher, professor, Michael Sandel, and he wrote a book called what is it called? What Money Can't Buy. And he talks about how, and he has this little phrase that he says that's so true. He's like, instead of being a capitalist, having a capitalist economy, we've become a capitalist society where like everything is about money and how to get ahead. And this is where, like, even though you're not religious, I'm not religious, I think religion is actually has some benefit in some people's lives, as long as you don't become an extremist, because of course extremes in every direction is dangerous. If you're extreme in your liberal views, you're the one who is burning down police stations. If you're extreme in your conservative views, you could be blowing up birth control clinics or whatever. So extremists in every direction can be dangerous. But I think using some type of spirituality, some type of maybe religious book or story to help you realize that there's more to life than just this material world, or there's more to life than just financially getting ahead, and there's bigger things into life, like the way people are going to remember you, the type of impact you have on your loved ones, enjoying and experiencing life, and that a lot of the memories you're going to end up looking back at and enjoying wasn't about how much money you made, and it definitely wasn't going to be times you were at work. It was going to be times you were with friends and family and conversating and talking and laughing and joking. Those things are for the most part almost free, and you can enjoy that. So the things that really are going to bring you happiness are those things. One of my favorite quotes is "Satisfaction is the death of desire," and it's actually a song title for a metal band that I grew up liking, Hatebreed. And the Satisfaction is the Death of Desire was always interesting to me, because it helped me realize at a very young age that this material thing that I desire will satisfy me, and then that desire is going to be gone, and then I'll move on to the next material thing. So it's a very temporary satisfaction, and it's a very it's not something that's going to last and that I'm going to care about for years to come. And
even John Paul Getty, Ricky, said that the happiest times he ever had were, well, he actually said he was never happier than when he was just on a surfboard, because sunshine is free and the sea is free. People should, they should learn more from this. But you see, that this is why I bang on so much about the whole of our existence being aimed at producing profit for the people at the top. Because if we could get rid of that system, there's no reason why we couldn't be freed from, just the basic anxieties. Yes, everybody wants to be in a situation where they don't have to worry about cost of phone calls, cost of gasoline, cost of the next set of tires for the car. Yeah, the basics. But I don't think that most people really are all that greedy. I don't think most people are that bothered about having their own private golf course like Donald Trump, or having their own private jet like Jeffrey Epstein. I don't think many people are all that bothered about that. And we could have that much more anxiety-free existence if people can only find the courage to get rid of this system completely, because that is what we need to do next. And the only sort of final point I'd like to make is that, I am surprised that Donald Trump hasn't, or somebody like that, or Clinton or somebody hasn't sort of like called me a communist or written me off like that. Oh, come on, conspiracy thing, commie, what? I was expecting something like that. This whole problem that we have is not going to be solved by any kind of political doctrine. Forget about the isms. If it doesn't matter whether it's socialism, communism, Fauvism, Tovism, Reaganism, Thatcherism, we're not going to do it in that way. Forget about doctrines altogether. What we need to do, what we need to focus on as decent people in this age, is creating a world without corruption. It's as simple as that. And I think technologically, it might now be possible. There was a very quick comment on against one of my films that said we've got cameras on the shoulders of police officers. Why can't we have them on the shoulders of every politician, even when they go to bed? And we're going to have to do something like that, whereby every single public official is monitored. Every word they say, every minute of every meeting they go to, their lovers, their friends, their everything. There's always this problem. Who watches the watchers? We've got to create a situation where the public can watch their politicians 24 hours a day if they want to. That's the society that we need to be aiming at. And that's what we should be demanding right now of the people who are giving us the pandemic. No more pandemic, no more political parties. We've got to bring that to an end. We don't need them anymore. Who's arguing, for Christ's sake, anymore about having whether we should have a communist program or a capitalist one or a socialist? No one has been arguing about anything to do with that for years and years and years. I do think that Americans need proper healthcare like we have in Europe, but I think if you were just given it in no time at all, people would realize it was better and they would just accept it. But we are not going to go to what I think should be the next natural stage of human development until we create a world that's got rid of the biggest blight of mankind, which is human corruption. Some things work. eBay works. People didn't think that eBay would work because people are just going to lie, aren't they? This car has done 24,000 miles when it's really done 124,000 miles. That's bound to happen. But eBay has worked. People are told you've got to give the details of anything that affects the value of whatever it is you're trying to sell, and people have. The mere fact that eBay has worked and made that man into a billionaire, Jeff Skoll or whatever, the mere fact that that works proves that you can have honesty and decency in human affairs on a very large scale. If eBay can work, I don't see why political life in the Western world can't be made to work somehow. But we're not going to get there while we've got the Clintons and the Bushes and the Trumps and the Prince Andrews and the Prince Charleses, while we've got this dirty few people at the top, having everybody dancing on a string like a puppet. While we've got that, it won't happen. And if this pandemic continues the way it's going, I think the reason I think I'm partly on this show is that a lot of people are wondering where this is going to end. And the harder we push against it, history would say, the harder they'll push back. And that's why I think we will wind up with martial law. And we are definitely going to keep this pandemic until the day that the Prince Andrew story is no longer current. And that could be years. That could be a very long time. So long as Prince Andrew and the whole issue of his child abuse and child sex trafficking is part of mainstream news, we will have this pandemic. It will last that long, because that's the true reason why we've got this pandemic. They've given us this pandemic. It is man created, and we're going to be stuck with it so long as he's in the news. and it could be a very long time.
But how would you explain all the other countries that are involved then, that where that story is not quite as big? So like in America, it seems like they're still pushing the pandemic, but
it's big it's huge throughout the world, Ricky. Believe me that all of Europe, all of Asia, Australia. I mean, I've been getting letters and seeing it passed around every single place.
So you think it's a way of getting attention off the Prince Andrew?
Well, I'm saying that it was created. I mean, Prince Andrew gets caught with his pants down, and within a few weeks, we've got a pandemic, and people can't add 2 and 2 and make it 4. Come on.
No. So there's there's a lot of I think a lot of political agendas that this whole pandemic thing is being used for, and that's probably most likely also one of them in the UK. In the US, to be honest, there's a lot of other things. I mean, when you look at like the vaccine agenda, you look at big pharma's influence on what's going on. The Bill and Melinda Gates is a nonprofit organizations.
I see that, Ricky, but to me that's all part of the same story. I mean, look how that all links up with Epstein, and look at how that in its end goes to Ghislaine Maxwell, and how that links up with Prince Andrew. I'm losing my voice, Ricky.
Yeah.
I think we better wrap it up. I can always tell when it's going to go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Francis. I really appreciate your time. I love these long form conversations because we can really go deep into so many different topics and really kind of share ideas, and you never know where the conversation is going to take you, which is why I enjoy them so much. So, but thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for being outspoken and sharing your perspectives and opinions. And hopefully we talk again in the near future.
Well, absolutely. I'd better say, in wrapping it up, I think I'm going to be very busy, at least till Christmas, with this whole issue about the book. I can see that's going to take up so much of my time, and there are other things as well. But I think in the new year I'll be, and that's not too far away. It's only a few.
Yeah. Whenever you want to come on to talk about anything, or you want to come on to promote anything, let me know. Yeah, contact me. We'll definitely have you back on. So the book is in the process of being written. Do you have a title or anything?
No. The book is going to be the film. That's what the fans have been asking for, Ricky. Is that they're just? I mean, I said hello and gave a little wave to this lovely lady called Brianna Weaver, because her letter was so typical of all the ones I've been getting, where she just said, look, does Mr. Conolly have the film, just the words written down in a book form? I would buy it if it existed. It hadn't occurred to me to do it.
So like a transcript.
The fans have been saying. I mean, I'm gonna try and make it, very sort of neat and have illustrations, or a lot of illustrations with it. But I will have to do some extra writing to go with it at the beginning and the end. I think the afterward is going to be very important, because so much has changed since the movie became viral. I mean, look at the pandemic, and Brexit and all the rest of it. So I think there will be, a bit to add at the beginning and the end. But the book itself is just going to be the words from the film with illustrations, and in a package.
Awesome. Well, when that's out and you have a little bit more free time, we'll reconnect. I'm sure now till then a lot will happen, so we'll have plenty to talk about. And
Ricky, I actually think it could be very important too. I really do. And believe me, if something just suddenly goes bang, I'll wind this up now in a way that, I'll wrap this up like this. One of the reasons I was happy to talk with the Zillas was that I did warn people in my movie that the day might come that they might use a weapon of mass destruction against their own people, if that was the only way to stop them from going to jail. The elite, I think, at this minute are very, very scared, because with this Prince Andrew thing and the Ghislaine Maxwell thing going on, that It's like they've lost control, and that terrifies them. And if it looked like they could be exposed, all of them, and it was a straightforward choice between pretending to have World War III or not, I think they would start World War III. I honestly think that they would say, oh, for God's sake, everybody, listen to the sirens. North Korea is attacking us, when they're not. And if they did start that by using a nuclear weapon against their own people, you can rest assured it won't land anywhere near you. It won't land anywhere near Boston or New York or anywhere like that. The kind of places that it might be dropped on will be places like Portland and Oregon. They are dispensable. You know, they won't bomb LA, they won't take out Hollywood, and they won't take out New York because that's Wall Street. But, you know, I want Americans to hear this because this is important. It's possible that some Americans sometime might say to themselves, well, Mr. Conolly, you understood this and you never warned us that our ruling class is so crazy that they could use a nuclear weapon against their own people. You never warned us. Well, you know what, Ricky? I just did. Don't come back to me and say, you never told us this could happen. I told you in the film and I've just told you now. This is my fear, that things are going to get this bad. I mean, how could anybody have this look at this pandemic and not think that things could go that far? Things could go that far if we don't change things around. And I think we better wrap it up there.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Francis. Have a great night, and I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future.
Absolutely, my friend. It's been a great pleasure. You take care of yourself.
You too. Thank you. Take care. Have a great night.
You too, my friend. Bye-bye.